The shout cracked through the air like a slap. "Hey, you are in the wrong area!" The words burst from Officer Daniel Crowley's mouth, harsh, crude, and dripping with disdain. He stood blocking the entrance of the federal courthouse in Rivergate City, pointing toward the street, as if shooing away a homeless man. In that split second, the crowd in the square froze, and the man being insulted paused, turned his head, and looked back. Aaron Whitfield, a black man in a dark gray suit, his eyes calm yet carrying an undercurrent of power Crowley had no idea existed. Beside him, young Officer Matt Cooper let out a weak laugh out of habit, but the smile vanished the moment he met the man's gaze, deep and still like a lake before a storm. That morning for Aaron had begun like any other. He woke at 5:30, brewed a cup of strong black coffee, and sat in front of a thick stack of documents on his walnut desk in his quiet home in Maple District. Outside the window, the first light of the day slipped through the trees, while inside him was the familiar weight of responsibility. He read each line of the reports on unlawful traffic stops and civil rights violations, where Daniel Crowley's name appeared repeatedly, like a smear of ink, stubbornly reappearing across page after page. Each file contained fear, humiliation, sometimes despair from innocent people. The truth sent a chill down his spine, even though he had witnessed it for many years. The radio in the kitchen crackled, then the anchor's tense voice came through. Breaking news this morning. Protesters are gathering in front of the federal courthouse, calling for police reform after a series of discrimination allegations. Aaron took a bitter sip of coffee, stared at Crowley's file one more time, and felt a strange sensation settle into his mind, both cold and familiar. He knew today would be long. He did not know it would change the entire city. Several blocks away, Daniel Crowley began his shift in the stale smell of burnt coffee and leftover sweat from the night crew. He ignored warnings from his superiors about media image and proper procedures. To Crowley, police authority did not come from the law, but from the fear he planted in others. Cooper sat in the passenger seat trying to keep a neutral face while Crowley rambled about the protesters. "Give them an inch, and they will tear everything apart," he said, voice dripping with contempt. Cooper listened, but his stomach twisted. He had once dreamed of becoming a police officer to protect people, not to fear the man sitting next to him. The streets of Rivergate that morning carried a heavy tension, like a storm waiting to break. Protesters held up signs demanding the justice they had been denied for too long. The federal courthouse towered over the square, a cold white block of marble where thousands of cases had reshaped human lives. And this morning it was about to witness a confrontation no one could have predicted. Aaron ascended each stone step with steady steps and a composed posture. He did not rush. He did not bow his head. His calm was the armor he wore each day in a world where a successful black man could still be treated as an outsider at the courthouse where he worked. The security officers at the gate recognized him instantly and greeted him with respect. "Good morning, Mr. Whitfield." He responded with a gentle nod and a brief, warm smile. But Crowley did not recognize him, or rather, he never bothered to look closely. All he saw was a well-dressed black man entering a space he believed belonged to people like him. And so the insult came out, like a reflex, a habit, nurtured by years of unchecked power. When Aaron stopped and looked directly at him, the brief silence shifted the air. Something in Aaron's gaze made Cooper hold his breath, as if he had just witnessed a tiny crack form in the ground before it widened into a chasm. Crowley did not see it. could not see it. In a mind conditioned to look down on others, he saw only an easy target, someone he believed would lower his head when shouted at. He did not know that the man standing before him was about to become the biggest storm of his life, a storm he had summoned with his own hands. And in just a few hours, he would wish he had turned around the moment he saw that gray suit step through the gate. But it was already too late. One small moment, one contemptuous sentence, and the fate of an entire police department had just been pushed to the edge, without anyone realizing it. Daniel Crowley had no idea that just a few minutes before he hurled those contemptuous words across the square, Aaron Whitfield had left his home carrying a heavy but perfectly steady calm. As he drove his gray sedan down the tree-lined streets of Maple District toward the courthouse, his mind lingered on the worried smile of his eldest daughter. She had texted him after seeing the protest news that morning, telling him to be careful. It was not the kind of warning meant for an ordinary man. It was a warning meant for a black man walking into a place full of power, but also full of invisible dangers. Aaron thought of his wife who had passed away many years earlier. If she were still alive, she would have sent the same message. When he arrived in the center of Rivergate, the atmosphere had grown sharper. Red protest signs, chants for justice, and the rhythm of hundreds of footsteps echoed across concrete warming under the rising sun. The protesters seemed to be carrying the anger of the entire city. And between them, police units stood in rigid lines, eyes fixed on the crowd as if facing an enemy instead of citizens. Daniel Crowley and Matt Cooper drove around the area, Crowley's eyes constantly searching for something, anything to unload his irritation on. He looked at the crowd with open hatred. Over the years, that hatred had become a habit, a way to feel powerful, a way to justify judging anyone who did not fit the framework he believed was right. Cooper sat beside him, silently watching through the rearview mirror. He saw the fury in the eyes of the protesters when they looked at the patrol car. He also saw the fear and resignation on the faces of people of color when police officers walked past. Cooper understood even if he did not dare say it out loud. They feared him, but they feared Crowley more. Every time Crowley let out a mocking laugh at someone on the sidewalk, Cooper felt a knot tighten in his chest. Crowley slammed his hand on the steering wheel when he saw a group of young activists raising signs at the courthouse gate. These kids only know how to cause trouble, he growled. Cooper glanced over, frowning slightly. He recognized the familiar expression in one protester's eyes, the look of someone ready to respond to abuse with a phone, with evidence, with truth. He knew today would not be peaceful, but he prayed none of it would involve him. Meanwhile, Aaron had already stepped into the large hallway of the federal courthouse. His footsteps echoed evenly on the marble floor, not rushed, not slow, carrying a steady rhythm capable of calming anyone walking behind him. Security officers bowed their heads politely, and a few assistants lightly tapped their folders as they passed, offering quiet thanks for the fair rulings he had delivered over the years. Aaron nodded back, courteous, yet deliberately distant. He never allowed personal emotion to follow him into a place where words could change the course of someone's life. When he reached the third floor where his private office was located, Aaron felt the invisible pressure of an exceptional day. He knew that the police files from that morning would be the center of his closed-door meeting with judicial advisors. He knew that Crowley, with his long list of complaints, would be the first name he needed to dissect, and he knew that anything happening outside any reckless move from the officers could become the spark that turned protest into chaos. But Aaron did not know that just a few streets away, Crowley had just spotted something that lit his temper like fuel on an open flame. A sleek gray sedan turned onto the boulevard ahead of them. A black man in an expensive suit stepped out of the vehicle. There was no sign of a violation, no legitimate reason to intervene. But for Crowley, reason had never mattered. What mattered was the surge of power he felt when he imposed his will on someone else. Cooper followed Crowley's gaze and instantly saw the target Crowley had just marked in his mind. And in that moment, a sharp wave of unease hit him. He did not know who that man was, but his instincts warned him with chilling clarity that this was not someone they should approach. A quiet, creeping sense of premonition, vague but precise enough to freeze the blood. The patrol car slowed as Crowley hit the brakes, his eyes locked onto the gray sedan that had just pulled out of its parking spot. The familiar predator instinct pulled his spine taut, like a drawn bowstring. He lowered the window, rested his elbow on the door, and watched the man locking his car with a calm confidence that irritated him instantly. The tailored suit, the polished leather shoes, the straight, composed walk, and the way he surveyed his surroundings with the awareness of someone who understood exactly where he was. To Crowley, none of that signaled success. It was an invitation, a chance to prove his authority in front of the crowd, filming across the square. This was the kind of man he hated most, successful, but black, calm, but unbowed. And what annoyed Crowley more than anything was that the man did not even acknowledge the patrol car pulling up behind him, as if Crowley were nothing more than a background extra in his life story. Cooper placed his hand on the dashboard, a cold shiver racing up his arm, as he saw Crowley switch on the indicator. He spoke quietly, almost pleading. "Dan, do not do this. He did nothing wrong." But Crowley was no longer listening. The moment he saw the man open the passenger door and retrieve a leather briefcase, every distorted assumption in his mind snapped together. A well-dressed black man, clean car, carrying documents, that alone was enough for Crowley to decide something was off, or at least enough for him to want something to be off. Crowley tapped the siren once, knowing the short burst was enough to make his target pause. It worked. The man turned, keys in hand, his eyes landing on the glint of light reflecting off the patrol car's windshield. It was only a second, but Cooper saw everything, the exhaustion, the caution, and a familiar sadness of someone who had lived this moment his entire life. That look said he had already prepared for what was coming, because it was nothing new. Crowley stepped out before Cooper could say another word. His shoes hit the pavement with sharp, deliberate force, like a declaration of dominance. The man stood still, his hand on the briefcase, making no movement that could be construed as resistance. Cooper felt his heartbeat quicken, but his legs felt glued to the seat. He knew exactly what Crowley would say, what he would do, and he knew he would not be able to stop it. Crowley approached, stopping only a few steps away, his voice, half shout, half interrogation. "Where are you going? What is your purpose in this area?" Aaron Whitfield's voice was low and full, a calmness that made the moment even more brittle. "I work nearby. I just parked and I am heading inside." Each word was measured, carefully placed to avoid feeding the fire burning in Crowley's eyes. But that very calmness irritated Crowley even more. "Where do you work? Do not play vague. No one comes here in a suit just to sip tea." Crowley's tone grew colder, pushing him into the position of a suspect who owed answers. Aaron tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing for the briefest moment. Not anger, but recognition. He understood the type of man standing in front of him, the kind he had seen named over and over in complaint files, the kind he had tried to stop with the law, yet still existed out here like an infection, left untreated. Cooper finally stepped out of the car, keeping his voice neutral. Dan let him speak. "We do not have a reason to." Crowley cut him off with a sharp glare. "Shut up, Cooper. I know what I am doing." Cooper tightened his lips, but inside him a deep wrongness spread like ice. He looked at the man and sensed something different. Unlike others, Crowley harassed, then overwhelmed, this man was not panicked, not breaking down, not lashing out. He simply stood there as if he already knew how this story ended. Aaron replied steadily, "I am not a threat. I have not violated anything. If you need to check my documents, I am willing to cooperate." Crowley let out a dry laugh, a laugh of someone convinced he controlled the entire situation. "Cooperate. You cooperate when I tell you to cooperate. Give me your papers, and do not try anything." Aaron moved slowly, describing each motion with his words. "I am reaching for my wallet in my jacket. You may observe." Crowley snatched the wallet as if collecting evidence from a dangerous suspect. Cooper resisted the urge to roll his eyes at the theatrics. As Crowley flipped it open, sunlight reflected off a thin metal badge inside. Cooper saw it for a split second, a faint gold glint, before it disappeared into Crowley's hand. He could not read what it said, but an icy wave of dread doubled instantly. Crowley did not even bother to look closely. He tossed the wallet onto the patrol seat, then smirked as if the game had only just begun. The man standing before him was not a suspect, not a passerby, not someone powerless. But Crowley did not know that yet, and his arrogant ignorance was pushing everything toward a point of no return. He thought he was hunting easy prey, but in truth he was slipping his own neck into a noose he had woven himself, and it was about to tighten. The air in the parking lot compressed like water about to burst under pressure. Crowley held Aaron's wallet in his hand, but did not bother to look at it closely. He only saw what he wanted to see: his own authority. The familiar satisfaction of forcing a black man to stand still in front of him. He snapped the wallet shut, shoved it hard against the patrol seat, then stared at Aaron as if he had already been convicted without the need for explanation. Cooper stood behind him, his hands pausing at his belt as he caught the faint flash of metal inside the wallet, the thing Crowley completely ignored. A slow, crawling instinct rose up Cooper's spine to the base of his neck, a final warning that everything was slipping out of control. Crowley stepped closer, closing the distance until their breaths could be heard. "Where do you work?" he demanded, his voice carrying the challenge of someone used to standing over others. Aaron held his posture, his hand resting on the briefcase like an anchor of calm within the chaos, trying to swallow him. "I work inside that building," he said, his tone steady as if stating something obvious. But Crowley heard nothing except what he could twist into suspicion. Instantly in his mind, the calm response became something deceitful. "That building, huh? Then you must have something to prove it. Or are you just pretending to be important?" Crowley grabbed Aaron's arm and spun him around as if he had caught a criminal red-handed. Cooper saw Crowley's face flush with excitement. It was the emotion that made him the most reckless, the most dangerous. He was no longer looking for a reason to restrain Aaron. He was enjoying humiliating someone he believed beneath him. Aaron still did not resist, but his eyes darkened for a moment, not from fear, not from anger, but from recognition. He had seen this too many times in too many cases, involving people who had no way to defend themselves. He understood exactly where he was standing the moment right before the truth was twisted beyond recognition. And he knew that if he was not careful, his life could be rewritten by the words of a police officer like Crowley in minutes. A small crowd began forming across the street. Phones rose into the air, their blue screens pointed at the unfolding scene. Cooper felt the shift instantly. These people were not watching for entertainment. They were watching because they had seen this scene far too often. A man of color stopped simply for existing in a place the police did not want him to be. Cooper drew a slow breath, trying to push down the nausea rising in his throat. He knew the more Crowley was filmed, the more aggressive he became. Crowley grabbed Aaron's wrist and twisted it behind him with unnecessary force, as if to prove Aaron had no right to react. "Why are you in this area?" "Answer me." Aaron kept his voice level, understanding that any tremor, any hesitation, could be interpreted as resistance. "I have a scheduled work appointment at the courthouse. I have worked here for many years. If you wish to verify my identity, I already handed you my wallet." Crowley burst into loud laughter, a sound too sharp and too big for the tension already suffocating the air. "Many years. You think dressing sharp fools me?" Cooper instantly recognized that blind arrogance. He wanted to intervene, but his feet felt cemented to the pavement. Part of him feared Crowley would turn his rage toward him. Part of him faced a bitter truth he hated admitting he had stayed silent for so long he no longer knew how to break the pattern. Crowley tightened his grip on Aaron's wrist, shoving him toward the gray sedan. "Hands on the car now." His voice ripped through the air like metal scraping stone. Aaron tilted his head slightly. He knew this was coming. He had sat through dozens of meetings about police abuse, had heard the tearful testimonies of people who had endured exactly what he was enduring at this moment. Now he stood in their place, felt their burdens stepped into their pain, and somehow he was even calmer. Cooper watched Crowley rummage through the documents on the front passenger seat of the sedan like an animal tearing through dirt to find something, anything, to justify its frenzy. When sealed federal court files slid off the seat and onto the pavement, Cooper froze. He could not read the full text, but he saw the embossed federal court seal clearly. His chest felt like it had been struck. "Dan, stop." "I think he is someone." Crowley cut him off before he could finish. "Someone what?" "Someone special." "Let me show you how special he is." Crowley bent down, snatched the folder, and flipped through several pages carelessly. His eyes skimmed over a signature belonging to a person he did not recognize, even though every police officer in the city should have known that name. Cooper recognized the emptiness in Crowley's gaze. He still did not understand what he had done. Aaron stood a few steps away, his eyes so calm it was terrifying. It was the calm of a man who knew the arrogant mask in front of him was about to crack. The calm of someone who understood Crowley was digging his own grave, one so deep he would never climb out. And then in a moment, lasting no longer than a single breath, Aaron's eyes met Cooper's. No words were spoken, but Cooper understood. A warning, a confirmation, an answer to the uneasy feeling that had followed him since the morning began. This man was not ordinary, not someone to be bullied, not someone Crowley had the right to humiliate. Cooper swallowed hard. He understood that truth more clearly than anyone, but Crowley was still blind, and that was the moment everything began to fall apart. Crowley straightened up the documents still scattered in his hands, but he did not recognize the familiar red federal seals stamped across them. Instead, he saw only an opportunity to raise his voice over power and prove his dominance in front of the swelling crowd. Whispering angry murmurs rippled through the phones being held up, but to Crowley none of it was a warning. It was fuel. He stepped closer to Aaron, his expression darkening as if Aaron had committed a grave offense. "Sit down. Sit on the curb right now." His tone was no longer a request, but a command from someone who believed he had the right to determine another man's dignity. Aaron glanced briefly across the parking lot, a short look that told him everything he needed to know about the tension creeping around them. He did not resist. He did not argue. He simply sat, letting his leather shoes meet the rough concrete. The posture did not diminish him, but it did expose the pettiness of the one giving orders. The sight made Cooper want to turn away. Shame rose in him, a shame he did not know how to name. His silence made him complicit, and he knew it. What frightened him more was the sinking sensation that he was watching a crash happen in slow motion, too fast to stop, yet too inevitable to avoid. The path ahead was already drawn, but Crowley saw nothing except the illusion of authority. Crowley circled Aaron like a predator pride, swelling, because he believed he had subdued him. His fingers tapped the gun on his hip in a dangerous rhythm. Phones were recording everything, yet Crowley seemed to think that made him more significant. "Make sure all of you record this," he growled. "We are dealing with a suspicious individual possibly connected to criminal activity." Individual. One word was enough to strip away the humanity of the man sitting silently on the curb. Cooper stepped forward, desperate to pull Crowley back to reality. "Dan, you are going too far. There is nothing unusual here." Crowley snapped around, rage flashing in his eyes. "If you interfere again, go finish paperwork at the office. I am handling this." Then he turned back to Aaron, ready to escalate further. "Illegal street sales in the area, or trying to pose as a businessman to cover something up. You think I do not know your type?" Aaron lifted his head, and for the first time since the confrontation began, his eyes carried a cold sharpness that sent a chill down Cooper's spine. Even seated on the curb with handcuffs on his wrists, his composure did not break. He spoke slowly, clearly, each word carrying the weight of the years he had spent upholding the law. "Officer Crowley, you are making a serious mistake. It was not a threat, it was a prophecy. A needle striking the precise point. But rather than stop Crowley, it enraged him. A mistake. Let me show you what a mistake looks like." He shoved his knee into Aaron's shoulder, forcing him lower, trying to impose humiliation like a lesson. The crowd erupted. A woman shouted that she was live streaming. A man demanded Crowley stop. A young protester yelled that this was illegal behavior. But Crowley puffed his chest and roared back that anyone who interfered would be arrested for obstructing an officer. The crowd stepped back, but not a single phone lowered. Cooper noticed a sheet of paper near his foot. He bent down to pick it up, and this time his eyes landed on the unmistakable text. United States District Court, the embossed federal logo, the familiar initials of the federal judiciary. His heartbeat skipped. He looked at Aaron, then at Crowley, then back at the document. In a single instant, all the pieces fell into place. Aaron Whitfield was not a businessman, not a passerby, not a target meant to be bullied. He belonged to the court. No, he was the court. Cooper opened his mouth to speak the truth, but his voice caught when he looked at Crowley. His partner stood there with a flushed face, heavy breath, and fingers tightening around the gun handle as if searching for the smallest excuse to snap. Crowley was destroying himself without realizing it, and if no one stopped him, the collapse would crash down faster than a siren's wail. Cooper looked at Aaron. Aaron looked back. In that gaze, Cooper saw two things: disappointment and a silent warning that they were moments away from the point of no return. And in that moment, Cooper understood that in just a few seconds, the truth would no longer be containable. Crowley moved in before Cooper could speak, grabbing Aaron's collar as if to haul him up, only to shove him back down again. The violent motion made the crowd erupt in outrage, but it only fueled Crowley further. He turned toward the people recording. "Anyone who wants to test their luck, stay right there." It was a threat dressed as official authority, but there was no real power behind it except the fear he tried to force onto unarmed civilians. Aaron kept his breathing steady even as the cuffs dug deeper into his skin, sending sharp tingles down his arms. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, not to plead, but to stay calm, to stay rational, to hold on to the oath he had lived by throughout his years on the bench. He knew Crowley was digging his own hole inch by inch, and he knew that in just a few more steps, everything would explode. Cooper stepped closer, his voice cracking from tension. "Dan, listen to me. Something is wrong. Stop." Crowley did not even glance at him. He jerked his chin toward Aaron. "This is what you call wrong classic type acting classy while hiding drugs under the seat." He turned back to Aaron, his eyes sharp like a blade. "And I have not even searched you properly yet. Get up. Now." Aaron rose, slowly, making every movement deliberate to avoid giving Crowley any excuse to invent a new accusation. The crowd held its breath as Crowley began his degrading search, patting down every pocket, every fold in the suit, even yanking on the belt as if hunting for a weapon. Every gesture was captured by dozens of phones. But Crowley did not see, he never saw, too consumed by the thrill of authority. As Crowley reached into the inner pocket of the vest, Cooper could not take it anymore. Dan handed over. "Give me his documents. I need to verify something." But Crowley laughed dismissively. "Verify what scared are you, or trying to shield him?" He snatched the wallet off the patrol seat and flipped it open aggressively. Cooper leaned in, barely breathing. Then he saw it. Clear, undeniable, impossible to misunderstand. A federal identification card with the name he had heard countless times in internal briefings: Honorable Aaron Whitfield, United States District Court. Cooper froze, his face draining of color, as if he had just witnessed a disaster unfold in real time. "Dan, my God, he is!" But Crowley cut him off again. He snapped the wallet shut and tossed it aside like trash. "Now I will show him what respecting the law looks like." Crowley grabbed Aaron by the shoulder and turned him to face the crowd, raising his voice as if delivering a grand speech. "This is why the city is a mess. People who think they are above everyone else. People who think wearing a nice suit means they can walk wherever they want." Cooper saw the future racing toward them like a runaway train. His head pounded. This was not just abuse of authority. This was intentional violence against a federal judge. And he had stood there silent, letting it happen. But there was still time. A handful of seconds to salvage whatever remained of sanity. Cooper clutched the federal document tightly and stepped forward. "Dan, stop." He is a sharp blast of a car horn sliced through the air. It was not from their patrol vehicle. It came from the end of the street. A black SUV without plates turned in, moving slowly but purposefully, like an arrow aimed directly at the chaos. The crowd instinctively parted. Cooper's heart lurched. Crowley did not realize, did not notice, did not understand. The door opened. Two men stepped out, black suits, communication earpieces, the confident stride of people who knew exactly why they were here. The entire crowd went silent. Cooper swallowed hard. Crowley stood still, annoyed. "Who are you?" One of the men held out a badge. His voice was deep, clear. No need to raise it yet. It filled the space with authority. "United States Marshal Service. We are here for Judge Aaron Whitfield." Cooper closed his eyes for 2 seconds, knowing everything had officially spun beyond control, and Crowley still had no idea that his nightmare had just truly begun. The black SUV sat still like a full stop in the middle of the parking lot, and the crowd erupted in breathless shock. Crowley froze for a beat, his face rigid as the two agents approached with steps so precise it felt as if the ground had been measured for them in advance. One of the agents held his badge up to Crowley's face. A real badge, real authority, real power. "We are responding to an emergency signal from a federal judge." The agent's voice was low, steady, and sharp as a blade. That calm was not a warning. It was an ultimatum. Crowley frowned, clinging desperately to whatever scraps of authority he thought he still had. "Who gave you permission to jump into my investigation? He is being detained for suspicious." The agent raised a hand and cut him off instantly. The silence stretched just long enough to expose how absurd Crowley's words were. Then the agent spoke, his tone so deep that several people in the crowd shivered. "Investigation. You are detaining federal Judge Aaron Whitfield. You are violating federal law, and this will be addressed right now." The sentence hit Crowley's center like a lightning strike. The truth was too large, too sudden, and his mind needed several seconds to absorb it. Daniel Crowley, the officer who lived on top of others, stared at Aaron as if the man had transformed before his eyes. His facial muscles twitched. His hand trembled, though he tried to hide it. No way. That is impossible. But Aaron stood still, his eyes calm, as if he had always known this moment would arrive. He looked at Crowley with a silence not born from triumph, but from the understanding that this was the inevitable outcome when power was used as a weapon. He did not speak. He did not need to. That silence alone made Crowley step back. Cooper stood behind them, his heart pounding so hard he could hear his own pulse. He saw Crowley blink rapidly, breathing unevenly, like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, without knowing if the ledge beneath him could hold his weight. Cooper wanted to say something, anything, but his throat tightened. He realized he was shaking, not from fear of the agents, but from fear of the truth about the man they had humiliated. The second agent stepped beside Aaron, bowing his head slightly in apology. "Sir, we will remove the cuffs immediately." He reached for the key on Cooper's belt without waiting for permission and unlocked the restraints with a single firm motion. The metal clicked open with a cold, final snap. The sound echoed like a verdict delivered on Crowley. Aaron rubbed his wrists, the deep red marks still burning. But he did not complain, did not accuse, did not glare with resentment. He simply stood straight, adjusted his vest collar, and took in a long breath as if shaking off the last traces of senseless violence. Crowley stepped forward, face-flushed, voice caught between anger and panic. I did not know who you were. You never said anything you did not identify yourself." Aaron turned, meeting his eyes. His gaze, calm yet sharp as glass, reflected a truth Crowley could not evade. "You never asked." One sentence. Just one. But it shattered every excuse, every justification, every hope Crowley had for salvaging the situation. The crowd murmured, not laughing, but responding instinctively to a truth so precise it needed no defense. Cooper clenched his fists. He knew what had just happened was not retaliation. It was the bare truth. The agent signaled to Aaron that they would escort him away for safety, but Aaron shook his head. "I will walk on my own." Then he looked at Cooper. This time the gaze held no anger. It held a question unspoken. "What did you see today?" Cooper lowered his head. He knew he had stayed silent for far too long. Crowley remained standing there, arms slack, looking like someone who had just had his weapon stripped from him on the training ground. One of the agents stepped close, his voice dark and steady. "You are required to remain on site for internal investigation, and we strongly advise you not to leave." Crowley opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his entire career, he was completely silent. Aaron walked away, not fast, but with each step carrying the quiet strength of a man who understood where real power lived. The crowd parted on both sides, instinctively creating a path as if for someone redefining the meaning of justice. In that moment, Cooper understood this was not just the end of a chaotic morning. It was the beginning of an earthquake that would shake the entire Rivergate Police Department to its core. Cooper stood frozen in the parking lot as Aaron walked away, leaving behind a heavy silence that draped itself over the area like a thick curtain. The crowd erupted into whispers, then into waves of outrage as people began piecing together what they had just witnessed. A black man publicly humiliated only to be revealed as a federal judge. A white police officer abusing his power so blatantly he did not bother to look at a federal identification card lying right in front of him. And a young officer who knew something was wrong, yet did not have the courage to stop it. Behind, Cooper Crowley looked like someone abandoned in the middle of the nightmare he had created. The aggressive confidence that had driven him all morning had vanished, leaving only wide, stunned eyes. He stared around as if hoping someone would tell him this was all a harmless misunderstanding. But no one came to his rescue. The federal agents stood beside him with their hands clasped in front of them like an invisible set of cuffs waiting to close. Their faces held no anger, no emotion at all, and that calm more than anything made Crowley tremble. Cooper swallowed hard, a cold sting running down his spine. He could see Crowley's future, with painful clarity, a future without swaggering patrols or rewritten reports. Everything would be dragged into the light. Every buried complaint would be dug up. Every lie used to conceal misconduct would become damning evidence. The collapse had started, and nothing could pull Crowley back from it. One of the agents turned to Cooper. "You are Matt. Cooper, correct?" Cooper nodded, his shoulders tightening like steel wire. "We will require your full testimony, and you should be honest." The agent's voice held no threat, but the message was unmistakable. This was Cooper's one chance to save himself from being pulled into the same abyss Crowley had stepped into. Cooper nodded lightly, but his eyes drifted toward Aaron, who was moving through the protesters, as if the police had not just tried to crush his dignity minutes earlier. He did not bow his head, did not look back, did not posture as a victor. He simply walked steady and certain, as though his entire life had prepared him for this moment. And the crowd who had come to protest injustice fell silent before him. Then a voice rose with quiet reverence. "That is the judge." Another answered. "He is the one fighting the department." A woman gripped her phone tighter, her eyes glistening. "They did that to him." Outrage surged, but within it was something else. Hope. After months of exhaustion, someone had proven that truth still carried power, even when men like Crowley tried to twist it, bury it, smother it. The truth still rose like water breaking through a dam. Behind him, Crowley lunged forward, his footsteps frantic, desperate to cling to whatever scrap of authority he thought remained. "Hey, wait! You have to say something for me." Aaron turned back, his gaze calm, not angry, not vengeful. Only the cold understanding of a man who had seen countless defendants walk themselves into ruin. "I have nothing to say. Everything has already spoken for itself." The words hit Crowley like a punch to the chest. The truth needed no defense. It had exposed him in front of hundreds of witnesses, dozens of cameras live streaming 2 federal agents, documenting every detail, and worst of all, Cooper, the one person who could testify that Crowley had been warned and still charged ahead, blind. Cooper stepped forward, looked directly at Crowley, ready to say something, anything, even admitting he had been wrong to stay silent. But Crowley looked at him with pure resentment, as if Cooper were the traitor. Cooper's chest tightened. He understood that from this moment Crowley was no longer a partner. He was living proof of the rotting authority Cooper had ignored for too long. One of the agents placed a hand on Crowley's shoulder. "You need to come with us." Crowley jerked back instinctively. "I did not do anything wrong, I just—" The agent's voice cut him off like sharpened steel. "You assaulted a federal judge, violated procedure, performed an unlawful detention, and abused your authority in front of dozens of witnesses. What part of that is not wrong?" Crowley's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Cooper turned away, unable to watch the moment the man finally understood the truth, too late. The agents led Crowley off the metal cuffs, snapping shut around his wrists with a small, icy click that sounded like a sentence being passed. Aaron stepped into the courthouse, the heavy doors closing behind him. But what had happened did not stay behind those doors. It spread across the square, across social media, across everyone who had witnessed it. Like a spark landing on a pile of dry hay, long overdue for ignition. And Cooper stood there understanding that from this moment forward, his life was changing direction. There was no path back into the quiet darkness of silence. The earthquake had begun, and it would not stop. Aaron stepped through the courthouse doors, but the whispers and shock from the square followed him like a wave that refused to die out. Inside the grand lobby, the security staff recognized him immediately, as they did every day. But today, their eyes held something more. Worry, anger, and beneath it a deep fear that what they had witnessed outside would swell into a storm capable of shaking the entire city. Aaron did not stop to explain anything. He walked straight toward his office floor, each step steady, each step a quiet effort to remain composed in a day that had already tilted far from normal. When his office door closed behind him, he finally allowed himself to exhale slowly. It took several breaths before the rhythm steadied again. Down in the parking lot, Cooper was still frozen in place. The federal agents had taken Crowley away, and the crowd had dispersed slowly, not because they were relieved, but because they were furious. Everyone murmured the same sentiment in different words. The truth had to come out. Cooper heard every syllable as if they were being hammered into his chest. He had not humiliated a judge, but he had stood there, silent, watching, allowing. And now that silence had become evidence, forcing him to face himself. When he finally walked back to the patrol car, his hands shook so badly he struggled to open the door. He sat in the driver's seat, but did not start the engine. He stared straight through the windshield, where the image of Aaron being forced onto the curb lingered like a ghost, refusing to fade. Cooper dragged a hand over his face, fingernails, pressing into his scalp, until the jolt pulled him back to reality. His phone buzzed endlessly in his pocket. He knew who it was, the duty captain, the patrol sergeant, maybe even internal affairs. But he did not dare answer. He knew what was waiting for him. At the police headquarters, news spread faster than fire in dry grass. Afternoon shift officers clustered together, staring at their phones, watching the live streams that had already been shared thousands of times. They watched Crowley shout, shove, and rummage through the belongings of a poised man, then moments later, federal agents arriving, stating the man was a judge. Those who had seen Crowley strut arrogantly through the halls now exchanged horrified looks. They knew his temper. They knew he crossed lines often, but they did not know that this time he had walked straight into a loaded gun. When the vehicle carrying Crowley arrived at headquarters, the atmosphere thickened. Crowley stepped out pale-faced sweat, dripping down his temples as if he had run a marathon without breathing. A federal agent walked beside him, holding his arm not violently but firmly enough to make it clear Crowley was no longer acting as a police officer. He was a detainee. A desk sergeant opened the door to greet them, ready to ask a question, but froze when he saw Crowley's desperate stare. The agent spoke first, voice sharp. "We need an interrogation room now." In that room, Crowley sat in a metal chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. One agent placed a recorder on the table, then dropped a stack of documents in front of him. Crowley looked down. His face drained completely when he saw photos of himself, photos of complainants, and bold red stamps reading civil rights violations. Each page sliced into the arrogance he had carried for years. Crowley searched the room with panicked eyes, as if the walls were closing in. I did not know who he was. I was just doing my job. The agent cut him off with a voice not loud but heavy like a hammer. What job? There was no violation, no probable cause, no threat, and you assaulted Federal Judge Whitfield while on duty. That is not duty. That is a crime. Crowley opened his mouth again, but no sound escaped. He saw the image of Aaron being forced onto the curb replay behind his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt real fear. Not fear of resistance, but fear of facing the truth. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Aaron sat in his office chair and leaned his head back slightly. He felt no triumph, no victory, only a strange heaviness settling into his muscles. A soft knock sounded at the door. It opened, and his legal assistant, Elena Brooks, stepped in with a panicked expression. Judge Whitfield, all of social media, is talking about the incident. The chief judge's office called. The Department of Justice wants updates. Reporters are gathering at the police headquarters. Everyone wants to know if it is true. Aaron looked at her, his voice calm but firm. It is true. And we will let the law do what the law is meant to do. Elena exhaled as if releasing a weight she did not realize she was holding. But what startled her more was Aaron's calmness. He did not tremble. He did not rage. He did not complain. He only stared out the window where protesters still stood, but with different eyes now. Eyes that knew their fight finally mattered. Across the city, Cooper drove toward headquarters, feeling like he was balancing on a wire strung across a canyon. When he arrived, the patrol captain summoned him immediately. The captain looked at him as if reading every thought behind his eyes. You were there from the start. Say everything. Do not leave anything out. Cooper sat down, his hands trembling slightly, but his gaze steady. For the first time in his police career, he did not intend to dodge the truth. He recounted everything, every word Crowley shouted, every violation of procedure, every moment Cooper tried to intervene but lacked the courage. When he finished, the room fell silent. His captain stared at him for a long time before speaking softly, without anger, but with a weight that crushed Cooper's chest. "You did the right thing, but you did it too late." And Cooper knew that was true. At the courthouse, Aaron received a phone call from a familiar voice, the head of the Federal Investigation Commission. His tone was low and deliberate. "We will pursue this thoroughly, Judge Whitfield, but there is something important. We would like your recommendation on how deeply to intervene in the Rivergate Police Department." Aaron closed his eyes briefly, then answered, "If you want change, you must start at the foundation." Outside, the late afternoon sun settled over a city bracing for the truth to come to light. And though the day had begun with humiliation, Aaron knew it would end with something larger. An irreversible earthquake, a doorway opening for real justice. And it all began with one meaningless shout in the middle of the square. Aaron left his office just as the evening light swept across the courthouse hallway, casting long, slanted streaks of gold on the stone floor. He stepped into the hearing chamber where an emergency session had already been assembled. Federal prosecutors, representatives from the Department of Justice Internal Affairs investigators, and even a delegate from the mayor's office were present. The attendance of every single person was proof that what happened in the parking lot was no longer the reckless misconduct of a single officer, but an incident shaking the federal level. Aaron walked into the room in silence. Every eye turned toward him. Not toward a victim, but toward a man holding the key to change. A prosecutor began, voice low and cautious. "Judge Whitfield, we need a full confirmation of the events. Everything will be documented and transmitted to federal authorities today." Aaron nodded. He recounted everything with a clear, steady tone, neither adding nor omitting a single detail. Every sentence he spoke felt like placing another brick into the structure of a wall that should have been built long ago. A wall meant to protect citizens from abuse of power. When he finished, the room fell silent for several long seconds, as if everyone needed time to absorb the weight of the truth. A federal agent rose and placed a thick file on the table. We reviewed Officer Crowley's records. A total of 41 complaints in 6 years, all dismissed or marked insufficient evidence. The room tightened. Another prosecutor added, "We found signs that multiple reports were altered before submission. This is not individual negligence. This is systematic concealment." The words fell onto the table like a hammer on an anvil. Those who had once covered for Crowley, who had signed off on doctored reports, were now nothing more than trembling names in an investigation. When the hearing concluded, Aaron rose and stepped out of the room, feeling the air lighten, but simultaneously grow heavier with responsibility. He knew tonight the Rivergate Police Department would not sleep. A full-scale audit would begin immediately. Officers complicit in the code of silence would be called in. Old reports would be torn open. No one could escape the wave coming for them. Outside, the city lights flickered on. High-rise buildings glowed like towering pillars across the skyline, and among the slowly dispersing protesters, eyes still lingered on the courthouse. They did not know the details of what was unfolding inside, but they understood one thing. Justice was moving. Aaron stepped out the courthouse doors, but he did not head to his car right away. He stood still for a moment, looking down the stone steps where just hours earlier Crowley had screamed into his face with the arrogance of someone who thought himself untouchable. The wind blew past, carrying the smell of traffic and dust, but Aaron sensed something else in the air. A shift. Small, but real. A quiet change in how people viewed police, viewed the law, viewed power. The courthouse door opened behind him. It was Cooper. His steps were slow like those of someone emerging from a battle with himself. When he saw Aaron, he stopped, his hands tightening together. Judge Whitfield. Cooper swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. I want to apologize. I stood there. I knew it was wrong from the start. I should have intervened. Aaron lifted a hand slightly enough to stop him. He looked at Cooper with the eyes of someone who had presided over thousands of cases, but holding no contempt. What matters is not that you were silent, but that you choose not to remain silent anymore. Cooper lowered his head, his chest heavy yet somehow lighter now that he had spoken the truth aloud. Regret could not erase what had happened, but it could build the foundation for something better. Aaron understood that, and he nodded an acknowledgement. As Cooper walked away, Aaron watched him with something that felt like a small but genuine hope. Any system that wished to change needed people inside it willing to stand up, and perhaps Cooper would become one of them. Aaron's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen, one of the senior federal judges. When he answered, the voice on the other end was deep and weighted. We have been monitoring the situation. The entire country is talking about it, and we would like you to chair the Oversight Committee for Regional Police Reform. Aaron stood silent for a brief moment. This was no small request. It meant facing a system he knew intimately with all its bright corners and its darkest shadows. But refusing would only slow or corrupt the change. I will accept, he said. Not loudly, not hastily, but with the certainty of someone who had known the answer long before it was asked. When the call ended, he descended the courthouse steps. Night had fallen completely, but the streetlights illuminated the path ahead in bright patches. He remembered his daughter's message that morning, "Dad, be careful, the city is chaotic right now." He smiled softly. Chaotic, yes, but also a moment when everything could finally be put back in its rightful place. As he neared his car, Aaron paused. A few people from the earlier crowd stepped toward him, hesitant but respectful. One man spoke quietly. Judge Whitfield, thank you. You showed all of us something we thought we would never see again, that justice is still real. Aaron looked at them for a moment before responding, his voice gentle but firm. Justice exists only if we hold it upright together. As he stepped into his car and started the engine, the city stretched out before him, vast, conflicted, and complicated. But tonight, it was filled with hope. A truth dragged into the open had sparked a change that no meeting, no speech had ever achieved. And as Aaron drove away from the courthouse, the street lights swept across his face, illuminating his eyes. Not with triumph, but with the resolve of a man who knew the road ahead was long yet for the first time it was headed in the right direction. When looking back at the entire story, we clearly see a lesson that experts in civil rights and system reform have repeated for many years. Abuse of power never appears in a single moment. It is the result of prolonged silence, of reports being ignored, of wrongdoing becoming normalized. But what is even more striking is that a single truth revealed at the right time can force an entire system to confront itself. The case of Judge Aaron Whitfield is not just an individual incident. It is a powerful reminder that justice does not always originate from the highest authorities. Sometimes it begins with a phone recording with a witness who refuses to walk away with a young officer deciding to speak the truth he knows. If you believe stories like this need to be continued, need to be shared to remind us that transparency is not a luxury, but a shared responsibility. Please like and subscribe to follow the next journeys. Every interaction you give not only helps the story reach further, but also reaffirms that we still believe in the value of truth and human dignity. Before leaving the video, leave a short comment no more than 3 words as a shared message we want to send to any system of power. Comment: Hold justice.